Good afternoon. Welcome to the Minnesota edition of our state webinar series, exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat, the State of the States report. Before we get started, let me run through a few quick logistics. Everyone has been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to shrink and reopen. You'll see a questions section of that control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square on the right-hand side. That decouples it from the control panel, allowing you to type in your question or comment there. We have built time for question and answers during and at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar and will send the link to everyone who registered. Please feel free to share this recording with others. Let me now introduce myself. I am Chris Coffin, American Farmland Trust's Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. Co-hosting with me is Dr. Mitch Hunter. Mitch is AFT's research director, and he oversaw the Farms Under Threat project. He also happens to be based in St. Paul, so he brings some local knowledge to this particular webinar. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me do a very quick introduction. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We work to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We work from kitchen tables to the halls of Congress, from direct farmland protection projects to soil health initiatives, to training service providers on land access and tenure strategies, to state and federal policy development and advocacy. We have 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. Let me now turn it over to Mitch.
Thanks, Chris, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining. I want to say that we're really delighted today to be joined by a number of valued partners, including Minnesota Department of Agriculture, USDA Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program, Renewing the Countryside, the Minnesota Land Trust, and a good number of farmers, farmers market representatives, and other organizations. So again, thank you all for joining us. Before we get started, I want to just recognize some of the people who've made this possible. First, USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. They've been a huge collaborator and supporter on this project, as has our research consultant partner, Conservation Science Partners. And now I'd like to welcome our very special guests, Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, Tom Peterson, and Supervisor of the Energy and Environment section of the department, Bob Patton. So thank you both so much for joining us. Commissioner Peterson, we hope that you maybe take a few minutes to offer your perspectives on the importance of saving farmland in Minnesota, and also on how this report might inform the department's work going forward.
Well, thanks. Thank you, Mitch, and thank you, Chris, for this opportunity today to visit about this subject, where it's very near and dear to me, and something that I really appreciate the work of American Farmland Trust to keep this issue up in the air. I think that we always say we have a lot of balls we're juggling, and I'll be honest, and especially in COVID, it's hard to concentrate on some of these issues. So we really depend on organizations like yours to help, keep these issues up in the air that are so important. For myself personally, this is a very big issue. I grew up west of the cities, and on a farm that is not there anymore. It's probably got about 90 houses sitting on it. And through my teenage years, I watched encroachment of that good farmland in Carver County get paved over in Chanhassen, where our hayfield is a target now. It's important, but it's also very, very difficult, and it's a hard thing to live through, and it's a hard thing to watch and wonder about our policies about when we're paving over very good farmland or building houses, which is necessary. I also, where my farm is now, is within an hour of the Twin Cities, and I've watched development happen in my time where I am here as well, where bigger farms get divided up. We had the housing bust in 2008, where a lot of that stopped, and so you have a lot of these smaller parcels that are sitting open that started to fill up, and which is good, but it's very interesting. Before I was commissioner too, I worked for the Minnesota Farmers Union, and as a lobbyist, I worked quite a bit on some of our different issues that we have here in Minnesota, our Green Acres tax credit program, our state and metro area ag preserves law that we have, were very important issues for me personally. At the department, we have a staff that really work hard on this. Bob Patton, who's joining us today, and Becky Bulk. We have Jim Osley, who works on our Minnesota FarmLink program, which I'm glad to see mentioned here in the report too as well. You know, and so just looking at what those tools are as we move forward to help preserve farmland, but also open up opportunities for people to actually buy farmland is important too. And how do we get not just farms, but farmers? And so I know that of having bought several farms myself, how important that is. In Minnesota too is why, you know, I worked in, and the department did a champion our beginning farmer tax credit. We've established an emerging farmers report, and will be a task force. And then this week, we're also announcing a partnership with the DNR to expand our grazing and cropping and haying on state lands, which I see is also an important piece of your report. And so I just want to, again, thank you, and I look forward to the conversation and the presentation today. I just say in Minnesota, in the report, you can see we're a darker blue, but not the darkest blue. And so I really hope that it's good for us to look at our shortcomings and have that discussion and things that we could do better as well. And so I just, again, look forward to it, and turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Yeah, I have the same vision in my mind of, you know, as far as the policy scorecard goes, taking Minnesota up into that top tier of states. I think that would be awesome. And I just want to thank you for your leadership on all these issues over the years, and we look forward to working with you in the future to do more in terms of farmland retention and protection in Minnesota. And I understand, at least unless an emergency comes up, you're hoping to stay on, which is great. So we look forward to hearing more from you and from Bob Patton as well later on in the webinar, as we have some Q&A and other places for back and forth. So with that, I'll turn it back to Chris, I think.
Great. Yes, thank you, Mitch, and thank you so much, Commissioner. It sounds really exciting, some of the new initiatives that you have, and we look forward to talking about that a little bit more. Let's turn now to the findings from the Farms Under Threat State of the States report. Today, we're focusing on State of the States, which is the second in this research series. It paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state, and documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach that included advanced spatial mapping to identify the threats to the agricultural land, and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We're using this report to raise public awareness, to inform state and federal policy, and to encourage more direct and permanent agricultural land protection. For those of you who did not join us for our launch webinars in May, let me touch very quickly on our national findings. From 2001 to 2016, a period of historically low housing starts, the U.S. converted 11 million acres of agricultural land. That's equivalent to all the land planted in the United States in 2017 to fruits, nuts, and vegetables. The majority of that conversion was to low-density residential land use. We've known this type of conversion was happening because all across the country, scattered large lot housing has been fragmenting and disrupting farming and ranching for years. But until this report, no one has ever been able to map it and measure it. And once we mapped it, we realized just how big of a threat it is. Importantly, more than 4.4 million acres of the land converted was what we have identified as nationally significant land. That's land that is best suited for intensive food and crop production, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. As you can see from this next map, agricultural land conversion is a growing problem across the United States, no longer confined to large metropolitan areas. Small cities are sprawling, and the proliferation of farmettes and ranchettes on their outskirts has created hotspots of conversion in virtually every state. So now we're going to dive into the data available from Minnesota on our interactive website, and we're going to be assisted here by our colleague and navigator, Beth Fraser. So thank you, Beth. We're going to start over here on the right with this tab, Reports and Data. This is where you'll find the full report, where you find lots of descriptions about the methodology used, including on our PVR values that we'll talk about in a minute. And if you're interested in getting access to the geospatial data we used, this geospatial data layers tab that Beth has her pointer on is where you will find a form that you can fill out, and we will be back in touch to let you know what will be available and when. So now let's go to the drop-down menu and select Minnesota. Here you will find both the spatial data and the policy scorecard. We're going to start on the spatial side, and before we do, Beth is going to point out this Download Minnesota Conversion Summary. These are 2-pagers. There's also one on the policy scorecard that have the most relevant and important information and some beautiful infographics. And to that, we thank Mitch and his team for putting this together. The point of this particularly is to be able to download it for those of us that have limited bandwidth capabilities, and to use it for websites, to use it for discussions with policymakers and reporters and with members of organizations, so that we hope that you all will find this these 2-pagers very convenient for use. Now we're going to go back to the spatial findings, and we're going to start with land cover and use. So we used multiple national data sets to develop the best available spatial inventory of agricultural land use in the US. You can zoom in on this data layer to identify every type of land use in the state, including land that we've identified as low-density residential development. It also includes a first ever attempt to spatially identify woodland associated with a farm or a ranch. Our mapping shows 24.95 million acres of agricultural land in Minnesota, including 20.3 million acres of cropland, 3.4 million of pasture land, and 1.3 million acres of woodland associated with farms. We're going to come back to this in a little bit and zoom around. But first, we're going to go to the PVR values. For this project, we wanted to analyze the quality of land that is being lost to development, not just the quantity. So we created, with the help of a national panel of experts, an index to quantify the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of every acre of land in the US. This map shows the range of these PVR values across the state. The darker the green, the higher the PVR value. And the higher the PVR value, the higher the suitability for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. We then took these PVR values and used them to identify nationally significant land. This next map shows nationally significant land in Minnesota. You'll see that almost 20 million acres of land falls into this category, a whopping 79% of the state's agricultural land base. The vast majority of this acreage is in cropland, with about 1 million acres in pasture and 314,000 acres in woodland. The loss of this highly productive land in particular has important economic and environmental implications. When nationally significant land is impacted by development, intensive food production is pushed to more marginal lands. For farmers, this often means higher input costs and/or lower crop yields. And the environmental implications include faster soil degradation. The last category here is conversion. So again, we looked at a 15-year period, 2001 to 2016. We mapped the conversion of agricultural land to two types of land use. The first, urban and highly developed land use, includes the traditional culprits in farmland conversion. So expanding residential, commercial, and industrial areas, typically around the edges of cities and towns. This category, though, also includes rural, industrial, and energy production sites, so does pick up some oil and gas well pads and solar installations. The second type is low-density residential development, or what we call LDR. LDR areas range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses are being built. The majority of conversion over this time frame in Minnesota, 61%, was to LDR. And a note here about LDR. There may be some active agriculture on land designated as LDR, and some of those small parcels may be highly productive and profitable. But we also know that LDR tends to be a transitional land use. Land in Minnesota that was considered low-density residential land use in 2001 was 43 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land by 2016 than other agricultural land. And we know that continued conversion to LDR increases management challenges for producers who have to deal with farming in and around non-farm neighbors. Total agricultural land converted over this 15-year period was just shy of 180,000 acres. Cropland conversion accounted for just over half of that, followed by pasture land with 60,000 acres and woodland with 22,000 acres. And looking at the PVR values of the land converted, about 47% of the land converted was considered nationally significant agricultural land. So I'm going to stop there and pass it back over to Mitch for some perspectives on the spatial findings.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I've got a few thoughts I'd like to share. I also wanted to say that we will have some time later on to answer any questions. The questions box is open, so if things come up as we're going through this that you'd like to hear more about, or just you have any question, go ahead and type it into the questions area. So first, I just want to say that looking at the map of the nationally significant land, or this map as well, showing you can leave it there, Beth, it's okay. Showing just the incredible resources that we have in this state makes me proud, and also shows to me the need to do whatever we can to protect that land. And in the coming decades, I think that the value of Minnesota's cropland will become even greater as climate change starts to severely challenge producers in the South, in the West of the US and abroad as well. So we really need to protect this land, improve it as much as we can through good management, and be ready to play an even bigger role in the nation's food security as a state here. To me, I also see in the red areas on this map that every acre that's paved over is just more pressure to convert woodlots and buffer strips to cropland. So reducing conversion to development, I think, is critical to making progress on water quality and climate change, even as we face the continuing need to produce a lot of food, which may just be enhanced in the future with climate change and population growth. So I think the need is really strong to protect the farmland, and to get a good sense of where the conversion threat is, I just wanted to zoom in on a couple of places. So Beth, if you could zoom in kind of to the greater metro area, you can see there is conversion scattered across the state, but not surprisingly, it's really concentrated kind of between St. Cloud, Mankato, Rochester, and then the Twin Cities. So What's really interesting to me, and I think this might be similar to what the commissioner was mentioning, is right above Elk River, right north of Elk River is kind of the 169 corridor. And my family and I used to drive up there basically every weekend in the summer to get up to the cabin. And as far as I could tell, it was pretty much open. But now we're seeing a lot of conversion in that area, which really isn't close to any major cities. It's basically ex-urban conversion. A lot of it is this low density residential. So to me, it's a pretty unexpected part of the state to have farmland conversion going on, and just shows the need to address this issue all across the state. One additional area I'd like to point out is down around Farmington. So Beth, if you could zoom in down there as well. And what's interesting, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's even better, thank you. What's interesting, and you can't see it super well here because you can't see what's behind the layers exactly, is that we're picking up a really wide range of different conversion drivers here. So a couple of these red areas, including the horizontal rectangle that's kind of in the upper right corner of the screen, are actually solar panel fields. So I think anybody who drives around the countryside in Minnesota has probably noticed the big expansion in solar fields, which in some ways is really critical for renewable energy development and fighting climate change, but we also need to consider what's going on as far as its impacts on agriculture, and especially very high quality soils, what we would call nationally significant. So we've got that solar panel conversion. There's also a new wastewater treatment plant, and then there's the traditional urban and low density residential development. So out here, kind of on the edge of the metro area, we're seeing a real hodgepodge of development. And my fear is that there's really nothing to stop that from continuing out, country mile by country mile, until it eventually merges with Cannon Falls and Northfield and some of the other towns in the southeast. And the same goes pretty much around the metro region. So my hope is that having this new data, and especially the really brand new data on low density residential conversion, will help spur the state and local policymakers to action so that this kind of perpetual expansion of the metro region doesn't happen. So I'd like to pause here for a minute and see if the commissioner or Bob Patton would like to chime in with any additional thoughts when it comes to the patterns that we're showing around the state as far as land quality and conversion.
No, thank you. That's really interesting. Not a surprise. I was interested in the Fargo area, and knowing there's an issue up there with the with our diversion and the Fargo area growing, and then western Wisconsin. I go home that way a lot too, or just to see some of the development there, as we have a lot of people in the Twin Cities or work in the Twin Cities. Yeah, the Fargo area is really interesting to me. It's not an area that I've looked at, but I'm familiar with the expansion just because of the proposed diversion that we have there as well. One other thought too, you mentioned buffers. Minnesota has a buffer law. I didn't know how much you looked at that. And I know that we've added, thousands of acres of buffers in Minnesota in the last couple of years to come into compliance. And so that was a thought. And then just the quality of farmland in Dakota County is we lose some of that is I think that's always tough. Not that Elk River's the land's not as good sometimes, but it's any of it is always hard to lose. But I was those are just some of the comments I had. And one other comment I wanted to make too about policy that I forgot is that I feel like right now too, for some of the other people on the call, we don't have a legislative champion as much in Minnesota. We used to have people like Senator Steve Dill or people that would really carry the ball on legislation on sprawl. Lately, it's been more about undoing some of the programs that we had than it has been about protecting them. So just a couple comments, and Bob might have a comment on the solar part. I was interested in that too as well.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Yes, I'm Bob Patton, and I've worked for the department for 25 years alongside Becky Balk, who really runs the farmland program. Steve Roos is also on the call listening in. Steve has has worked with us for a number of years now on these issues, and particularly in the solar issue. Also a student worker, we have Jordan Buchholz, also works on that. We became very concerned about large-scale solar development that was being approved by the Public Utilities Commission, some of which has been proposed and built on prime farmland and some of the areas with the greatest amount of prime farmland in the state. And we've worked on that issue with the Department of Commerce, who does the Department of Commerce here in Minnesota, does the environmental work for the cases that are before the Public Utilities Commission. And last summer we held 2 listening sessions with stakeholders on the issue, which included farm groups, solar developers, electrical utilities, quite a number of groups. And what we've developed since then with the Department of Commerce are guidelines for developers, because there's actually a piece of the Power Plant Siting Act rules in Minnesota that protects prime farmland and actually prohibits development of energy facilities on prime farmland unless there are reasonable and prudent alternatives. And so that was an area that it's a law that's helpful, but also was difficult to interpret for the Public Utilities Commission and the developers. And so we've developed some, in cooperation with Commerce, have developed some guidance that is now on the website. The scale of solar development really matters, because small scale development of solar can actually sometimes be helpful for a farmer's bottom line, but the large scale takes large areas of farmland out of production. I just wanted to also shout out a little bit to Dakota County. Mitch was focusing on development around farmland. Really hit over the history of the farmland protection programs, particularly the Metropolitan Agricultural Preserves program in the Twin Cities. Dakota County's really, and the townships within Dakota County have really been leaders in terms of protecting farmland through Metropolitan Ag Preserves. And then in addition to that, Dakota County back in the early 2000s adopted their farmland and natural areas conservation easement program. So there is really the one active program in the state for a PDR program. That's all I have to say right now.
Great.
All right. Well, I was just going to follow up on a couple of things there, Chris. I just want to thank you both, Tom and Bob. And, you know, as far as the buffer law, Commissioner Peterson, yeah, I think that's a great thing that the state has in place. And I was just kind of making the comment that in a future of having less farmland to work with, there could be more pressure against that sort of thing, with the need of with the idea of that we need to kind of produce all out. So to me, it's about balance and making the right decisions about our development now so that we have the land we need into the future. And I also just wanted to thank Bob for pointing out that, you know, Dakota County, even though some conversion is occurring there, is also really being very proactive, and it would be great to have more counties that are following that model. So with that, I'll turn it back to Chris.
Great, thank you guys. That is really insightful. Appreciate all of that. Before we turn to the policy scorecard, we actually want to stop and get some input from the audience. We're interested in folks' perspectives on what you all think will drive agricultural land conversion over the next 10 to 20 years in Minnesota. The reason why we ask this now is that this helps to think through, as we're thinking through policy responses, making those responses fit what folks feel will be those conversion drivers. So please take a minute to fill out the poll. You can vote for more than one. And if you're having any trouble voting, it might be because you're in full screen mode. You have to come out of that mode to be able to vote. So we'll give it a minute for answers. Great. Okay, Beth, what are we seeing? It's very consistent, I will say, with what other states, audiences in other states have been saying. We have been doing these webinars around the country. It's been consistently the two that are the top here are the two everywhere else, but it's interesting that for you all, the generational transfer of ag land is seen as a larger driver of conversion than more and poorly planned development. So let's keep that in mind as we get to the policy scorecard. Our intent with this scorecard is to highlight effective elements of state policies that address what we have seen as the historic drivers of ag land conversion. So that's poorly planned development, lack of profitability in agriculture, and the fact that land is most vulnerable when it transfers between generations. While AFT has been engaged in policy development since our founding, this is actually our first ever effort at a state policy scorecard. And we know that there are many ways that states support agriculture, and this is not an attempt to score them all. In fact, the commissioner mentioned the buffer law, the beginning farmer tax credit, both of which we feel are innovations and great, and there are many other things that Minnesota is doing in support of agriculture and farmers. But we focused specifically on 6 different types of policies and programs that tie directly to the land. And so looking at these, you see these here on the left-hand side. We looked at purchase of agricultural conservation easement or purchase of development right programs. These are voluntary farmland preservation programs that compensate landowners who choose to place an agricultural conservation easement on their property. We looked at land use planning. Most states delegate planning authority to local governments. Minnesota does as well. However, states can play a more active role requiring localities to develop comprehensive plans, identify agricultural resources, and adopt policies to protect them. And so that's what we looked at here. We looked at property tax relief. So in Minnesota, the Green Acres program, these are programs that reduce property taxes paid on ag land in recognition that working land requires far less in municipal services than does residential development. We looked at agricultural district programs. Minnesota is one of 14 states with a program. So here we looked at the state Ag Preserve or Ag Land Preservation Program. Protections and incentives offered through these types of programs differ by state. We looked at Farm Link programs in Minnesota, again, is one of only 10 states with a state-sponsored Farm Link program. And again, these programs differ by state, but typically offer a range of services and resources from online real estate postings to technical assistance, training, and educational resources. And last, we looked at state leasing and leasing programs that make state-owned land available to farmers and ranchers for agriculture. Sometimes that's their primary purpose. More often, agricultural use is secondary to generating income for a public purpose or protecting wildlife habitat. So, Beth, if you scroll down, you can see how Minnesota scores relative to other states. It is essentially on the 5 of the 6 at or above median for all, which is great. I want to stop here because this is impressive given that Minnesota is being scored against states, particularly those on the east and west coasts, that have been grappling with high farmland conversion rates since the 1970s. We don't expect Minnesota to necessarily have as robust a state of policy tools as some of those states at the very top, when those of the dark blue. The point we want to make here is that as Minnesota faces growing conversion and development pressure, its policy response needs to grow as well if it wants to maintain a robust agricultural base for its ag sector. So the website allows you to dive into the factors behind each of the scores. We're not going to do it for all because we do want to get to questions, but we're going to do a couple. Let's do land use planning. And if you go to the bottom, just so that people know how to do this, if you look at the very bottom, it shows you how we scored, what are the elements behind each of these scores, which gives you a sense of what other states are doing that Minnesota may not be doing, and vice versa. Minnesota gets points for requiring comprehensive planning for jurisdictions within the 7-county metropolitan area, and for requiring in rural counties that the county adopt a comprehensive plan in order to enact zoning ordinances. And Minnesota also gets points for tying farmland protection planning with its state agriculture preserves. States that scored higher in this area have specific state goals around both compact development and retaining their agricultural land base, and require consistency between local comp plans and those state goals. On property tax relief, Minnesota has one of the top scores for the amount of agricultural land enrolled through green acres, and gets good points for having withdrawal penalties. I think the one thing where Minnesota probably didn't score as high relative to others is that some of those states use those withdrawal penalties to put into their local and state farmland protection programs. On agricultural districts, let's go here. Again, the statewide program scores really well. The only thing that I think makes Minnesota score not quite as high compared to others is the fact that the percent of land, if you look over there at the 6, that it's a fairly small percent of land enrolled. Now, we recognize that that does not include the separate 7-county ag preserves, but I think still that number would not be as high as several other states. Let's look at the last 2, which again on FarmLink, Minnesota gets very good points on here. The only reason why it's probably not at the top is that it has not codified its program. And I think that we feel that having statutory authority for a program gives it a little bit more, hopefully, permanence, though we recognize that's not always the case. And then lastly, on state leasing, Minnesota does really well here as well. That what we were looking for is for programs that were actually trying to make land available for agriculture, as Minnesota certainly is doing. And it was great to hear the commissioner talk about a new initiative around state leasing. We raised this state leasing because we really feel that state-owned land offers an opportunity, and looking across at all parts of state-owned land, not necessarily just those agencies, those natural resource agencies, but other agencies that might have smaller plots of land that might be in or near urban areas that provide important opportunities for new generation farmers, especially to get onto land. I do want to mention a couple of things. We do think of Minnesota as being a leader with its beginning farmer tax credit. Again, this is very important. We are hoping in a future scorecard to include those beginning farmer tax credits because we feel that they're very important. And the last point that I want to mention is that while Minnesota doesn't have a state PACE program, there is funding available for the purchase of agricultural conservation easements through both USDA's Agricultural Conservation Easement Program and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. These are both NRCS programs. We do hope that the funding increases and changes made to both of those programs in the 2018 Farm Bill, and we credit Congressman Peterson and his leadership on this, will continue to improve their utility for farmland protection. And we will be reaching out over the summer through the National Agricultural Land Network to solicit feedback on how these programs can be more fully utilized by partners around the Midwest. So I hope that was a helpful cruise through the findings. If you do have questions, please write them down. And as we go out of the website, we're going to launch a poll which asks which policy or policies you think would be most valuable to focus on for Minnesota. And again, this is just to get a sense of where people feel there is value. And I apologize, the two sort of generational transfer land access type programs, we didn't have room to add them here. If you feel that those, either one of those are the most important, please write those in on the question panel. Okay, what are we seeing, Beth? All right, this is great. This is useful in terms of thinking about land use planning, what more can be done there, easements in terms of whether there's sort of more use opportunity for use of ASEP or RCPP or state or county efforts on that front. We will be hosting a series of policy webinars beginning in the early fall, which we hope will be a way for those of you who want to learn more about some of these tools and really dig into what some states are doing, the ones that are the leaders. So that we hope that that will be a way for people to focus more on some of these policy tools. So going back to the PowerPoint, one thing that we want to point out that is missing from our spatial analysis is protected agricultural land, because there is not a comprehensive data layer focused specifically on protected farm and ranch land. We are building this new database now. If you have not heard from us and you hold ag conservation easements, please do let us know by adding a comment in the question panel and we will be in touch. I do see that there are some green blobs, so we have some data clearly from Minnesota. So let's stop now and I'll turn it back to you, Mitch, for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. We've got quite a few questions. There's a few that I wanted to maybe address kind of at the same time. We've got a very passionate audience member who's raised what sounds like a really terrible situation, trying to deal with getting the agricultural use of her land recognized outside Duluth, and it sounds very, very frustrating. And I guess I can't speak to the vagaries of local zoning, but I can just say I feel your pain, and I'm sorry to hear that it's taken so long to have that somewhat recognized. It does not sound to me that if you're 20 minutes from Duluth, that the agricultural potential of your land should be minimized in that way. And I also wanted to say to the same questioner that if you go into the map and really zoom in around Duluth, I hope you'll see more on the PVR map of what we're showing for agricultural potential in that part of the state. We will show more if you zoom in closer. And also the questioner asked whether the PVR metric is maybe biased towards the traditional row crop farming. In reality, we tried to bias it towards specialty crop farming, and that's because we know that there are special requirements to grow a lot of specialty crops. They need maybe special soils or climate. or infrastructure and proximity to markets. So that land that can produce specialty crops effectively is maybe at a premium. And so we actually ranked and skewed our PVR ranking a bit higher. You can actually see that statewide in the Red River Valley. It's not specialty crops, but we scored wheat higher than feed corn because it's going to feed humans. And then if you find parts of the country that have a lot of specialty crop production, they'll be even higher still. So we really were trying to reflect those issues. One last thing I think is a really good question that the same questioner brought up, so I'm trying to combine all these, is how do you approach a situation where there's a local or regional area that would like to get a local or regional land trust going to protect agricultural lands, and what resources are there to be able to help communities who are interested in that? So I wanted to throw that to Chris and see if you can give a general answer, and then of course, Bob or Commissioner Peterson, if you have thoughts for Minnesota specifically, it would be great if you could chime in as well.
Great, thanks. Yes, on the land trusts, so there are any number of different answers, and I think that I would answer it this way, that number one, there is AFT has, through our Farmland Information Center, a farmland protection directory, so that it does allow you to see where there are land trusts that are doing active agricultural projects in a particular area. In terms of wanting to do more on that front, again, my short answer would be, please come join our National Agricultural Land Network, because our intent with that network is to build the capacity of communities and folks who are interested in agricultural land protection. And it is our intent to be able to help those folks who are looking to create land trusts that want to focus on agricultural land. So those are my short answers, and I guess let me just stop and turn to Bob or the Commissioner if you have other thoughts on that front.
Bob, I don't know if you do, or
I'm afraid I don't.
Okay.
I thought, Chris, you had a wonderful answer.
I just say, no, thanks, Bob, and I just say a couple of things that come to mind on the, the counties are really important in this in Minnesota, and how ag land is zoned and classified. It's something that I worked on for many years in my career, especially with smaller farms, and trying to get the ag homestead credit. And a lot of times what they would say is, counties will say you can't make a living on that, and so we're not going to give you the ag classification. And that can be really important. And it's really debatable about what's a living to people. And it's really interesting when counties get into that discussion. So we've seen Washington, Chicago, counties that are really important, but people might want to just be starting out a farm, and they might not be able to make a living at first, or they might not intend to, but they want to use it as part of their income. And so it's really interesting. That's a side note on that. But counties really important. And then in the trust situation too, counties play a really important part in that too, either as a partner, and they look at their bottom line. And I do worry about what the impact is going to be on farmland and in COVID, and just keeping it, and counties as their budgets get squeezed. Property taxes, of course, are a major generator. And so, it's an interesting conundrum, but, one that I appreciate that we're talking about today.
Great.
Thanks, Commissioner. Oh, Chris, do we have time for another one, or should we move on?
I think we should move on, and then let's get to remaining questions at the end. Okay,
well, I'm going to try to expedite this next little section so we can get back to some Q&A. I just want everybody to know that AFT has just announced a bold goal of doubling the amount of permanently protected farmland by 2040, and also reducing the rate of farmland conversion from 2,000 acres a day to 5,000 acres a day by 2040. And we know that to get to this goal, we'll need to lock arms with many different partners and practitioners So we are hoping that you all can join us and be part of that movement as well. We're going to be doing a few things to strengthen our commitment to farmland protection and help achieve this goal. One of them is establishing the new National Agricultural Land Network, which Chris has mentioned a couple of times. And we hope that we're going to be able to foster beneficial relationships between farmland protection professionals, whether they're from small land trusts, conservation districts, state level programs, or all of the different kinds of efforts in between. We're also providing some new leadership in key locations, including the Midwest, where we are now hiring a new Midwest farmland protection manager. So hopefully we can help advance and strengthen this programming in our region. We're going to be protecting more farmland ourselves and with partners across the country, and that especially includes areas where there's not a good established on-the-ground local partner. That might apply to parts of Minnesota, certainly. So we do land deals ourselves and operate as a land trust. So you can reach out to us if that's something that would be interesting to you here in Minnesota. We'll be advocating for stronger state and federal policies. And so here in the state, we don't have a big presence on the ground in terms of a policy function, but we have all the resources in the world as far as, you know, reports and data and information. So if people are working here to build towards stronger state policies, please reach out and we'd be happy to share some of those resources. And then finally, promoting research-based decision-making. That's what we've done with this current report that I'm talking about today, as well as future research that we'll be leading over the coming years, in particular looking at future threats from development and climate change out to the year 2040, which we really hope will help states plan ahead. In addition to what we're doing, we've got recommendations for what the states can do, and we're hoping that our analysis will be helpful for both the department and the state legislature to take us forward. So one of them is to analyze and map agricultural land trends and conditions, which we've already given a start with Farms Under Threat. Like Chris alluded to, we are happy to share our data with state and local partners. So it's a good start, but the state taking the bull by the horns on that one is very helpful as well. The next one is to strengthen or adopt a coordinated suite of policies, because each of these 6 policies do different things, and they're most effective when you put them all together. Luckily, we already have a pretty comprehensive set of tools in Minnesota. So really what we need is stronger support of the state legislature to keep making progress on those programs, and also at the level of county and local government, as well as the commissioner was pointing out how critical those are. Third one of supporting farm viability and access to land. Again, I would say this is a place where Minnesota is a leader between the FarmLink program and also the Beginning Farmer Tax Credit program, which is helping new folks gain access to land across the state. We actually wanted to include the Beginning Farmer Tax Credits in our report, but so few states have enacted that sort of policy that we didn't think it was fair. So that just goes to show how far out ahead we are on that issue. Then planning for agriculture, not just around it, so we take a really proactive approach. That's something I'm not as familiar with as far as what's happening in the state. So I will, in a sec, I'll be asking for Bob Patton's perspective on that. And we want, in the context of all these programs, to really focus on saving the best farmland. In Minnesota, that's almost all of it in that nationally significant category. So we can really be aggressive about protecting our land and be pretty confident that it's high quality. We of course recognize the importance of all the land, but that nationally significant land is a pretty irreplaceable resource. So with that, I'd like to throw it over to Bob again and see what your thoughts might be, Bob, on this question of planning for agriculture, the role of land use planning in Minnesota. I know that MDA is involved with it. So could you give us a little update of what's going on and maybe where you'd be hoping to go from here?
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. Appreciate that. As you mentioned in your summary of the state, we are among the states where there is not there are no state goals, land use goals, or plans. So planning is at the local level. We have a planning enabling law, which has could be improved, but is not too bad. We really over the years, our role partially it has been really to advise local governments on their comprehensive plans and zoning ordinances. We actually had one of the first, I think it was the first document in the states having to do with planning and zoning for animal agriculture, which was in the 90s when I started, was a very hot issue. We also had a companion book, Planning for Agricultural Land Preservation. And part of the notion there is that our agricultural districting program, both the statewide program and the Metropolitan Agricultural Preserves program, the foundation of them is local planning, because the agricultural preserves, the agricultural districts we have in Minnesota can only be established on land that is planned and zoned for long-term agricultural use. So that's really the linchpin, and it's the area that that some localities do an excellent job with, and many do a mediocre job, frankly, in terms of having strong agricultural land preservation baked into their comprehensive plans. In terms of the future, it's been frankly a while since we've had many counties talk to us about land use, and interestingly, that's seeming to pick up. I've heard some interest from some greater Minnesota counties that are interested in this again. So that's promising. And then in the metropolitan area, and I think there's some people on the line here who have been involved in the conversation. There is really interest in protecting land within the metro, particularly in Hennepin County, where Minneapolis is, and really trying to strengthen that in terms of access to land for essentially non-traditional farmers, emerging farmers, immigrant farmers, and that sort of thing. So that's another promising area.
Great, thank you, Bob. We are coming close on time, and so I want to take a minute to talk about two resources from American Farmland Trust. And while I'm talking about them, we're going to launch the last poll, which is relevant to both of them. The Farmland Information Center is a collaborative project we've had with USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service for decades. It provides technical assistance in the form of an answering service and a national clearinghouse of information about agricultural land. We are always looking to expand the type and amount of resources that are available through that clearinghouse. Having this question about what type of technical assistance would be particularly helpful to your agency and organization will help us here. I will say two things in particular for those who are looking for information, again, in terms of if there's no local land trust, or if you have landowners or farmers who are looking to protect land, we do have this farmland protection directory, and there's a lot of resources on that website about the agricultural conservation easement program, and generally what is an agricultural conservation easement. So that's very useful for landowners in that way. From the perspective of folks who are working to help make the case to retain and support agriculture. We are growing the number of resources around planning for agriculture, and hope to have a lot more of those in terms of land use planning tools, as Bob was mentioning. We are also, there is lots of resources around making the case. So our cost of community service studies, economic impacts of agriculture. So I encourage everybody to go to that website that is farmlandinfo.org and to write a question or to call in. The National Agricultural Land Network is newly created by AFT, and we are using it to build again the collective capacity of people who are working on saving farmland. And so this is very helpful to know about what kinds of technical assistance we should be focusing on. I love that land transfer and access is very high on this list, as is ag conservation easements. If you are interested in learning more, please do sign up for the network. You can go to farmland.org /NALN. You can send a question to me if you have any more questions about the network. But let me stop there and turn it back to Mitch. I don't know whether we have time for any questions or whether you just want to close this out. I leave that to you, since you have the home field advantage here.
All right, thanks, Chris. We are a few minutes over already, so there's a couple more questions. I'm happy to stay on and answer those. I just wanted to say, in case people have to go, huge thank you to Commissioner Peterson and to Bob Patton for joining us and contributing so much knowledge and wisdom about this issue in Minnesota. Thanks to everybody else for joining as well, and I just hope we can move forward together and work towards a brighter future for our farmland and for our environment as they go hand in hand. So if you need to drop off, thank you again for joining, but for those who are willing to stay, just a couple more questions that I thought were valuable. One says, you know, my husband and I have no heirs, and we want our working farm to stay a farmer-operated farm after we die. So how and where can we find tools and strategies to help us make this happen? I think there's a state program around this, so I wondered if either the commissioner or Bob would like to jump in and answer that one.
Well, we do have our Farm Link program. So if you go to the Minnesota Department of Agriculture website and search for Farm Link, you will find a page for that. Also in Minnesota, Renewing the Countryside has a farmland access navigator program. So I would encourage you to go to the Renewing the Countryside website and take a look at that. That may be a helpful resource for you.
And I'd also add Land Stewardship Project has like a clearinghouse or a piece where people can connect as well. And so it's good to have those opportunities in Minnesota.
That's great, thank you, yeah. The last question I wanted to bring up, because I think it's an interesting one to discuss, is with the population expanding, there will continue to be a need for new homes and related infrastructure. Is there a viable and realistic alternative to converting farmland? So, big question, gets right at the heart of the matter. I'm sure we'd all have, everybody on the panel here would have different perspectives. So I'll just chime in briefly, but then I'd love to hear from others. And I guess my thought is, you know, as the population continues to grow, some more additional farmland will be converted. There is an inevitability to it to a certain degree, but what we want to do is do that as intelligently as we can. Think about the trade-offs for society, minimize it as much as possible. We can do so much more with compact development, with infill development in areas that have already been converted away from agricultural use. And we know that that sort of development is less costly for local governments to serve, with water and sewer and fire and all the different services. So it actually benefits local government bottom lines much more so than sprawling development. And we also know that the demand for that kind of development has been rising as people want to be able to walk to work or walk to stores and live in more vibrant communities. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for win-wins. And then where development needs to occur on land that's currently agricultural, again, we need to site it well. We need to avoid our most productive land. And we need to make it as compact as is practical so that we protect the land that we need. So that's how I would address the question, but I'd love to hear from either Chris or Bob or Commissioner Peterson.
Well, this is Chris, and I will just weigh in to say I agree completely with all that you've said. I think it points again to the need, particularly for planning tools and those ability to be thinking about how we grow our cities and what do those zoning tools and planning tools to be able to grow more efficiently and compactly. And that there's both obviously a role for state government in that, but also an important role for local government as well. And that is something that we are hoping to focus more on those land use planning tools and zoning going forward.
Yeah, I would just thank Chris and Mitch. I agree, and I just really, again, thank you for the opportunity. And I think scorecards they're sometimes they're hard to look at, and different things, and it's hard to say, oh, we could be doing this or that. But I think again, it's really important, as I said earlier, to keep the ball up in the air, and a scorecard does help you kind of look and see and engage. And even for myself, being able to spend the time working on this, and you've been able to think of some ideas while I'm just sitting here, and connections. And really, as I think back to the local planning and how important that is, and the connections are just super important. My wife serves on our local planning commission, and they didn't meet for 10 years. Now they're meeting quite often. And as you look and see, like, what is the plan and where are we putting and in our area, the plan is usually to take nice farm fields and convert them into development. And so it is, having tools and having partners like AFT or the state and the other organizations is important. So I really appreciate the opportunity today.
Yeah, and thank you. I agree with everything that's been said. We've been very careful to say over the years that planning for agricultural land preservation is not anti-development. As Mitch pointed out, it's a matter of planning it well, planning where that development goes, planning for compact development where possible. Anyway, and I very much appreciate the insights that AFT has provided us over the years, and this latest report is really great. So thanks very much for all your efforts.
All right, well, great to hear it. Again, huge thank you to Commissioner Peterson and Bob Patton and everybody else. I think that concludes our webinar.
Thank you again for the opportunity.
Yes, thanks.
Absolutely. All right, take care, everyone.